There's something inside me that's been lost for a long time. Something no one around me seems to notice. Ever since my parents' divorce, everything I once knew started to crumble, and somehow, I got left behind. The colors of the world around me faded, and what used to bring me life and excitement turned into a distant, cold landscape. I withdrew, and the worst part, no one really noticed. The deepest pain, it's not what others can see. It's what I can't express. A constant emptiness, a disconnection from everything, even from myself. How do I explain something that seems so invisible to everyone else? I'm Rachel Harper. Today, I'm sharing a story that highlights the deep struggles many face behind closed doors. This story is based on real events, but some names and details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. If this story resonates with you, please consider sharing, liking, and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Now let's get into today's story. My name is Lúcia, and I'm a 34-year-old freelance illustrator living in Utrecht, the Netherlands. I was born and raised in a small town in Portugal, and for a long time my life felt full of promise. I was always bursting with creativity, constantly diving into new projects. But everything started to change when I was 15. That was when my parents got divorced, and it shook me in ways I didn't expect. The separation brought a sense of loss and confusion that hit me hard. Before that, I was an outgoing, lively teenager, but after the divorce, I began pulling away from people, struggling to make sense of the emotions I was dealing with. Looking back, that was the first big event that triggered the emotional roller coaster I've been on ever since. At first, my parents didn't realize how deep my sadness went. They thought it was just a phase. But as time went on, I felt more and more isolated and unsure of myself. I started losing interest in the things I used to love, like drawing and going on little adventures to explore new places. Slowly but surely, the depression set in, and I found myself on a path that would challenge me for many years. At first, the signs were subtle, just feeling tired a lot. But eventually, that exhaustion turned into something much heavier, like a void I couldn't escape. By the time I was 17, I felt disconnected from everything around me. The things that used to excite me, creating new illustrations or even just going for a walk, didn't make me feel anything anymore. I started avoiding people, turning down invitations to hang out with friends. Even my work, which used to be my passion, became something I dreaded. I started missing deadlines, and when I did manage to finish something, it didn't feel like my best work anymore. The feelings of not being good enough really took over. I'd constantly question if I was talented enough, smart enough, or just enough in general. My perfectionism made it worse. I got trapped in this cycle of criticizing myself, feeling anxious, and then procrastinating because I was scared of failing. And the guilt, it was always there, making me feel like I was letting everyone down, including myself. Eventually, this all took a huge toll on my everyday life. I stopped caring about things like personal hygiene or keeping my apartment clean. Even getting out of bed felt impossible some days. I'd lie there for hours, too drained to move. My work suffered a lot, and I started losing clients. People who used to admire my creativity and efficiency were now disappointed in me. It was like I couldn't escape the spiral I was in. The people around me didn't know how to handle the changes I was going through. My parents, still trying to move on from their own separation, didn't grasp how serious my situation was. They figured I was just going through a tough phase, something I'd grow out of, like most teens and young adults do. My friends noticed I had become distant, but they didn't know how to reach out. Some were afraid of saying the wrong thing, and most of them didn't understand why I had suddenly pulled away. In the beginning, I tried to hide my feelings. I'd put on fake smiles and act like everything was fine at social gatherings, but it was all a facade. The cracks were already starting to show. Depression wasn't just tearing apart my relationships, it was also eroding my self-confidence, and the career I had worked so hard to build. By the time I turned 26, everything hit a breaking point. The waves of depression came hard and fast, knocking me down in ways I couldn't have predicted. Some days I physically couldn't get out of bed. It felt like invisible chains were holding me down, and the weight of worthlessness and despair was unbearable. Even the simplest tasks, like getting dressed or brushing my teeth, felt impossible. The outside world seemed so far away, completely out of reach. On top of that, the anxiety kicked in. Panic attacks would hit me out of nowhere, while I was grocery shopping or even sitting in a client meeting. My heart would race, my chest would tighten, and my mind would fill with horrible thoughts. I'm not good enough. Everyone can see I'm failing. Why can't I handle life the way everyone else seems to? The fear was overwhelming, and soon I started canceling important commitments, both at work and in my personal life. I remember once being invited to a networking event with other illustrators. It was a huge opportunity to grow my career, but I backed out at the last minute, terrified of being judged. Instead of going, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried, completely overwhelmed by the fear of facing the world. João, my partner, saw that I was retreating more and more into myself. He tried to help, encouraging me to go out or take up my hobbies again, but most of the time I just sat in silence. During one of my worst episodes, I stayed in bed for days, unable to leave. The darkness felt like it was swallowing me whole, and I started wondering if I'd ever escape. I began to question if my life had any meaning, feeling like I had failed as a professional, a friend, and a partner. At first, I didn't know how to handle these crises. My instinct was to shut down and hide what I was feeling. I was too ashamed to admit to João, or even my closest friends, that I couldn't control my emotions, that my mind felt like it was falling apart. I thought asking for help would make me look weak, so I kept it all inside, sinking deeper into isolation. What made it worse was not having a strong support system. My parents, still in Portugal, would send encouraging messages, but they didn't really understand how bad things were. My friends invited me out, but after so many refusals, they stopped asking, assuming I wanted to be alone. What I really wanted, though, was for someone to see my pain without me having to explain it. The turning point came one night, on what seemed like an ordinary evening, but it ended up changing everything. I was sitting on the couch, trying to work on an illustration project, when out of nowhere, I had the worst panic attack I'd ever experienced. My heart felt like it was about to explode, and my chest tightened so much I thought I was going to collapse. I genuinely believed I was having a heart attack. João saw what was happening and rushed me to the hospital. After a series of tests, the doctors told me there was nothing physically wrong, but they finally put a name to what I was going through: anxiety and depression. When the doctor suggested I was having an emotional breakdown, it felt like hearing a truth I'd been avoiding for so long. That moment forced me to face the reality that I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. I needed help, but accepting that wasn't easy. In the days after the hospital visit, I felt this strange mix of relief and fear. I was relieved to know that what I had been feeling wasn't just me failing at life, but the fear came from the stigma attached to depression. I was afraid of being seen as weak or broken. For years, I had convinced myself that I could handle it all on my own, that I just needed to stay strong. That mindset nearly stopped me from getting the help I needed. The idea of therapy or taking medication made me nervous, and I worried about what people would think: my parents, my friends, my clients, even João. Thankfully, João was my rock through all of it. He didn't judge me or push me too hard. He gave me the space to figure things out, always reminding me, "I'm here for you, for as long as it takes." With his support, I took the first steps toward taking care of my mental health. Starting therapy was a major milestone. I found a therapist who specialized in anxiety and depression. That first session was hard. I didn't want to open up, but as the weeks went by, I realized how freeing it was to talk about my struggles. I had been carrying all that pain alone for so long, and just sharing it made me feel lighter. Along with therapy, I started considering medication. The idea of taking meds made me uncomfortable at first. I was worried about side effects and about being dependent on pills. But after talking it through with my doctor, I decided to give it a try. The first few days were tough, but over time, I noticed small improvements. I wasn't fixed, but I started feeling a little more stable, like I could manage my emotions better. Community support became a lifeline for me. My friends began to check in more, offering their support without judgment. I also joined a few online support groups where I could connect with others dealing with similar struggles. Hearing other people's stories helped me feel less alone. It was comforting to know that others were going through the same thing, and it made me realize I didn't have to face this journey by myself. This wasn't an instant fix, but it was the start of something better. By accepting help, I took the most important step, realizing I didn't have to do this alone. As I continued therapy and focused on my recovery, I began to understand that depression would still be a part of my life, but I could learn to manage it. The first few months were tough, but they brought a lot of self-awareness. I learned to recognize my triggers and spot the early signs of an impending depressive episode. This gave me a sense of control over my mental health, even if it was just a small amount. One of the most effective tools I learned was mindfulness. My therapist introduced it as a way to stay present without getting overwhelmed by negative thoughts. At first, I was skeptical, but over time, I started practicing small breathing exercises and guided meditations. While the effects weren't immediate, I noticed that these practices helped ease my anxiety. When negative thoughts would creep in, instead of letting them take over, I practiced acknowledging them and letting them go. Building a routine also became crucial. During my darkest times, I had completely lost structure in my life. To regain some control, I started setting small, achievable goals. I made it a point to wake up at the same time every day, take a shower, prepare a healthy meal, and go for a walk around the neighborhood. These little tasks, which once felt impossible, became vital in maintaining my mental health. And slowly, my passion for art came back. For so long, drawing had felt like a chore, but I started to let go of the pressure to create for clients and just drew for myself. I began illustrating landscapes inspired by the streets and parks of Utrecht, without worrying about deadlines or critiques. Art became an outlet for emotions I couldn't always express with words, and on the hardest days, it became my refuge. The online support groups had a huge impact on my recovery. Connecting with people who were going through similar experiences helped me realize I wasn't alone, and it validated the struggles I had been feeling for so long. Sharing my small victories with the group brought back a sense of belonging that I had lost. One of the wins I shared was finally being able to go on daily walks, something that once felt impossible. The encouragement I received from others in the group motivated me to keep taking those small steps forward. Over time, I started to appreciate the significance of those little steps. Before, I measured success by big achievements, but I began to find joy in the everyday moments, whether it was finishing a sketch, sipping a quiet cup of coffee, or just making it through a day without feeling overwhelmed by anxiety. These small victories reshaped how I looked at my depression, showing me that progress wasn't always about grand accomplishments, but about the steady, subtle improvements that made life feel more manageable. Another important lesson I learned was to accept my limits. I used to push myself constantly, thinking I had to be productive all the time and capable of handling everything on my own. But through therapy, I began to understand the importance of being kind to myself. Some days, I couldn't be productive, and that was okay. I learned to accept that healing wasn't a straight line. There were going to be ups and downs, and part of getting better was recognizing those moments without punishing myself for them. In the end, a combination of professional support, self-care, art, and connecting with others became my safety net. It wasn't a cure, but it gave me the tools to keep going, even when things felt like they were falling apart. One of the biggest victories came when I least expected it. After weeks of trying to work up the courage, I finally went to a networking event for illustrators. This was exactly the kind of thing I used to avoid at all costs, making excuses or canceling at the last minute. But something had shifted. Even though I was still anxious leading up to the event, I decided to face it head on, despite the voice in my head telling me I wasn't good enough. On the way there, my hands were sweaty and my heart was racing. The negative thoughts kept creeping in, making me doubt whether I would fit in or what others would think of me. But instead of giving in to the anxiety, I used the breathing techniques I had learned in therapy and kept reminding myself, "You can do this. It's just one moment." Getting there was hard, but when I arrived, something unexpected happened. I took a deep breath, looked around, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The event itself was a huge milestone. I talked to other illustrators, shared ideas, and stayed until the end without feeling the need to escape early. When I got home, I was exhausted but proud. It wasn't the kind of victory that comes from finishing a big project or winning an award, but it was much more meaningful. I had faced one of my biggest fears, putting myself out there, and I had come out stronger on the other side. Another significant moment came when I completed an illustration project for a well-known publisher. In the past, a project like that would have overwhelmed me, but this time, I took it at my own pace, without the pressure I used to put on myself. When I finally submitted the work, the feedback was incredibly positive. But what really mattered to me wasn't the external validation. It was the fact that, despite all the struggles I still faced with depression, I had created something beautiful and meaningful. Finishing that project showed me that I was still capable of progress, even on the hardest days. These small victories were pivotal in helping me realize that recovery isn't a straight line. It's a series of slow, often invisible steps. I started to value every act of courage, whether it was going for a walk, completing a chore, or simply making it through the day without feeling completely consumed by anxiety. These little actions, which might seem insignificant to others, were actually internal battles. When I won them, they gave me a deep sense of progress. Those moments taught me that victories don't have to be big or flashy to matter. Real resilience shows up in the everyday things, in the small, steady advances that bring me closer to a healthier, more balanced life. That understanding changed how I viewed myself. I began to be kinder to myself, realizing that my worth wasn't tied to how productive I was or how perfect my work turned out to be. Instead, my strength was in my ability to keep going, even when the future felt uncertain. While modest, those daily wins were huge milestones in my recovery. They brought me hope and resilience, and reminded me that even in the darkest times, light still exists. Each of those moments felt like a testament to my ability to take control back over my life. Yes, depression is still part of my story, but it no longer defines who I am or holds me back from what I can accomplish. I don't see myself as cured from depression, but I now view my journey as a constant process of learning and growth. The struggles are still there, but they're not as intense, and I feel more equipped to handle them. The tools I've picked up, mindfulness techniques, therapy, self-care, are now non-negotiables in my daily routine. I've learned that while depression is a battle I fight every day, it's also one I can live with and manage, even when the road is rough. Over time, I've also learned to be more compassionate with myself. I've accepted that mental health isn't linear, and that it's okay to have both good and bad days. What's different now is my ability to handle the hard moments. In the past, depression would overwhelm and defeat me. Now, when it creeps back in, I remind myself that while it's painful, it's temporary. This shift has allowed me to ease up on the self-criticism and practice patience with myself, which once seemed impossible. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that depression doesn't define me. For a long time, I thought my battle with it was a weakness, something I needed to hide. But now, I see it differently. Depression is just one part of my story. It's not all of me. My creativity, my resilience, my ability to keep moving forward even when it feels impossible, those are the things that define who I really am. By embracing that, I've allowed myself to live more freely and more authentically. I've also become a strong advocate for getting help. For years, I resisted the idea of therapy or medication, worried about the stigma, and convinced I should handle everything on my own. But now, I know that asking for help isn't a weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's what allowed me to reclaim my life, and I want others who are struggling to know that they don't have to go through it alone. Seeking help was the bravest thing I ever did, I tell people, and I encourage anyone struggling with their mental health to take that step. Today, I feel more connected to myself and to the world around me. I still have days when depression weighs on me, but now those days are balanced by moments of real joy. Whether it's a quiet afternoon walk, working on a new illustration, or just enjoying a meal with João, I've learned to appreciate the simple moments. And those moments, while small, are a reminder that there is beauty in life, even in the midst of the darkness. For anyone going through something similar, I want to share a bit of hope. I know it might feel impossible right now, I'd say, but there is a path forward. Recovery isn't easy, but every step you take matters. Even the smallest moments of progress are meaningful, and it's so important to reach out for support. Depression can be managed, and even in your darkest times, there's hope, love, and light waiting for you. I'm still on this journey, and I know there will be more challenges ahead, but I now have the tools to face them, and I've learned that recovery is a roller coaster with highs and lows, but also victories that make it all worth it. Most importantly, I've started to believe again that life can be full and meaningful, despite the hardships. Looking back, I realize that my struggle with depression has taught me a lot about myself. Despite the pain and tough times, I've found this inner strength that keeps me grounded, even when everything feels like it's falling apart. Depression, as hard as it's been, has also given me a new perspective on life. The importance of celebrating small victories and finding beauty in the simplest moments. Where I used to judge myself harshly for not being perfect or not living up to impossible standards, I now understand that my worth isn't tied to being super productive or always strong. It's in my ability to keep moving forward, step by step, even when the road ahead is unclear. Depression has taught me that seeking help is vital. It's not something anyone should face alone. If I hadn't made that brave decision to start therapy, I might still be stuck in that cycle of pain and isolation. Now I see that asking for help is actually an act of self-love. It's possible to live fully, even with depression always in the background. I remind myself, healing isn't a destination, it's a journey. And on that journey, support, patience, and self-compassion are essential. For me, the key to facing depression has been staying open to moments of joy, no matter how small they might seem. Whether it's feeling the breeze on a morning walk, finishing a new illustration, or laughing with friends, these small moments of happiness remind me that life still holds good things. I've learned not to take these moments for granted, because they're what gradually build up my resilience and hope. Thank you for taking the time to hear my story. It wasn't easy to put these feelings into words, but I'm grateful for the chance to share them. If my experience resonates with anyone out there, know that you're not alone, and there is always a path forward, no matter how difficult it might seem. In my final words of encouragement, I want to share this message with those who are fighting their own battles. I know how hard it can be, how overwhelming the darkness feels, but know this, you are not alone. Even on the toughest days, there is always a way forward, and every step you take, no matter how small, is a victory. Don't be afraid to ask for help and recognize that you deserve support and care. Depression does not define who you are. What defines you is your courage to keep going, day after day, seeking the light. With all my gratitude, Lúcia.
And so, we come to the end of Lúcia's story. Her words serve as a powerful reminder that even on the toughest days, there's always a way to move forward. The path to recovery may be long and full of challenges, but as we've seen, every step, no matter how small, is a victory. If Lucia's story resonated with you or someone you know, don't hesitate to seek help. Support is available, and there's no shame in asking for it. We're not alone in our struggles, and sharing these experiences can bring light and hope to those who need it most. Thank you so much for following this story. If you found it moving, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to keep following more stories of resilience and strength. See you in the next video.